This is Women's Tech Radio,
a show on the Jupiter Broadcasting Network interviewing interesting women in technology, exploring their roles and how they're successful in technology careers. I'm Paige.
And I'm Angela.
So Angela, this week we're going to talk with Liz Hill. She is a multifaceted, multi-hat wearing awesome lady over at Microsoft, and she gives us kind of a great rundown of what all of that means throughout the interview.
And before we get into the interview, I just want to mention that you can support Women's Tech Radio and the Jupiter Broadcasting Network by going to patreon.com/today. It is a subscription-based, kind of like a crowdfunding thing, but like I said, it funds the whole network and specifically Women's Tech Radio. Patreon.com/today.
We get started by asking Liz what she's up to in technology today.
Right now, I'm a service engineering manager at Microsoft, working in SharePoint Online Service Fabric team. For those of you not familiar with Microsoft's structure, it's backend engineering. We provide tech that supports all of our engineers that support the customers.
Wow, that's quite the mouthful for a title.
Yes, it is.
So that's supporting tech. That's kind of like internal tools for your company.
Yes, it's a lot of internal tools. My specific role is supportability tools and a lot around our Agile process and Agile development process specifically. So because we are a DevOps team, we do both development work. We also do operations work for our own technology. And so I work especially on the technology side as well as a lot of the program management too.
For people who aren't familiar, can you kind of give a high-level overview of what DevOps means?
Yeah. So DevOps is a new model. It's been growing a lot in the past couple of years, and I've seen it come more and more in force. It's where the people who are writing the code are also doing the support for the code that they write, is the short version of it. So that means that when their code breaks, they're the ones who go and fix it, as opposed to having maybe a separate operations team who are the ones responsible for fixing that code.
Okay, so like you're doing your own deployment and maintenance.
Yeah, you do your own deployment, you do your own maintenance, you do your own troubleshooting a lot of times. So you don't necessarily have a completely distinct operations team to rely on to do all of that work. You're doing a lot of the work yourself.
So that sounds like you're the other side of the DevZiner.
Yeah, you're doing really everything. So it's really interesting because it crosses so many different boundaries. It's very novel in the approach in that it assumes that everyone can do everything. So for me, it's been very interesting to watch how it's been working, or when it hasn't been working in other places. And how people feel about it. I'm on a lot of different Agile groups, and because Agile has really adopted the DevOps model, it's been very interesting to watch people talk about it and say, well, this works really well, this doesn't work very well, and why. So it's fascinating to me.
Why do you think Agile has adopted that so well? Like, what about those two philosophies kind of tie together?
Well, Agile philosophy is really about doing the best work, but doing it incrementally and minimally and consistently doing the same level of work. So it's really it's not about delivering the perfect code at the end of this long, huge cycle where you have a huge time for bug fixes. It's about going in and finding them and saying, oh, this didn't work right. Let's go immediately and fix it in the next sprint. Or this didn't work right. So I think that it really goes together a lot, as opposed to sending it off to some separate, vague testing group off in some other building and saying, oh, well, they'll tell us what's wrong with it. You're the ones testing it, and you're showing it to the customers and testing it with them effectively in your retrospective, and seeing, the customer say to you, oh, this isn't working for me. This is what I actually need. So you're getting that feedback more frequently, as opposed to at the end of this really long cycle, this 1 to 2 year, cycle that you would normally go through.
That makes sense.
And what does your team look like? Is when you say that you develop it and you fix it, is that literally just one person, or is it a group?
No, it's a group. Our team is made up of 4 distinct teams, my team and then 3 other teams. So my team is primarily, we're all program managers in terms of trade, by and large. I have the most technical background, I suppose, of all of us. And then the other teams are full-on developers. They're all software developers, but they're all small groups of software developers. We're about 20 people total, I think, and we all support each other's technology. So we're always looking at each other's tech. There's no one person who owns, one piece of technology, and that's what they support continuously 100% of the time, always. They may be the expert, but everyone looks at each other's code. Everyone's always helping each other out. We always share best practices. We're always talking to one another.
That sounds like a really awesome collaborative environment.
It is. It's really neat. No one works in a vacuum. And that's been the case in every dev team that I've worked with. There's no vacuums anymore. It used to be very much more of that, you'd have people working solo in their offices. And I haven't seen that in probably 5-6 years.
I think there's a lot more movement to code as craft. And I think that collaboration is kind of key in that.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned having the most technical background on your team. What is that? Where did you come from? How did you wind up at Microsoft in this crazy role?
So my background started when I was 8, and I got kicked off of Prodigy the first time for not doing my homework. My family had computers all throughout my childhood. My father was very interested in technology. I learned about bulletin boards from a babysitter when I was 10. And when I was 14, I was at an all-girls school and was definitely the odd girl out. So I had a T1 and a computer lab to myself and was bored. So I started building web pages using GeoCities, of all things. Their GUI builder, and I hated it. So I learned HTML and I learned a little bit of CSS, and I started building my own web pages because why not? There were tons of free web page hosting sites out there, GeoCities, Tripod, all the rest. And it was really fun for me to learn that. I switched schools and I took Novell administration classes and Cisco networking classes, Windows Server administration classes. And that's really what I fell in love with, was the infrastructure and the networking pieces. I did take another development class, but I wasn't interested in it. And I think that's because it was, very much taught in the, here's what you do to develop, whatever the project was. It wasn't there was not a lot of freedom in that class. So I ended up starting in electrical engineering at NC State and got my bachelor's degree in English after I wasn't having a lot of fun in electrical engineering. But I interned at Cisco, and aside from a brief stint in the public sector, pretty much stayed in the tech sector my career. And a lot of what I've done has been, everything from, hey, we need an inventory database. Okay, so they handed me, a box and said, just put Windows Server 2000 on it. And I, built that with PHP and MySQL back in the day, and it worked. And then, I got handed a book on Cold Fusion. Here, go learn Cold Fusion. Here, go learn Ruby. So a lot of my career has been, hey, here, go learn this. Even if I haven't been in a specifically technical job, I was in a marketing and merchandising role, and they, just said, well, you know how to use SQL, so write your own SQL queries. Okay, sure. Check them out for me. But yeah, I'll go do that. Oh, here, go learn Ruby so that you can, write these scripts. You can adjust all the XML manually for your stuff. Okay, cool. So it's been really interesting in that I've had a lot of technically non-technical roles and still have been in very much technical bent.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
I mean, I always think that there is room for technical excellence in almost any role. There's always, most of us have had that experience of being that guy. Even if it's just your family, you're the person they call because they have a computer problem. And
yes.
I think it happens in offices too. And, if you're open to it, there is room to do things like, oh, hey, I see this problem. We're emailing this Excel spreadsheet around and it's causing problems. Why don't we just have a database for this?
Yeah. And I mean, that was how I got my start in project management. Was I was the most technical person at one of my jobs, and we were doing a we were doing a server migration, and they needed my help because I understood what all of the consultants were talking about, quite frankly. And, management didn't really understand a lot of it, and they didn't understand a lot of the UI design issues that were coming up, and, where I could speak the same language as the consultants. And so they brought me in, and it was great because it really showed me that I could have both a technical and non-technical side to my career, and I could combine the two in a way that I really enjoyed.
So what is it about the technical side of your career that like fires you up? Like, it sounds like you're pretty passionate and have kind of always been. Like, is it just that you've got that kind of mindset, or like you love puzzles? Like, how does that wrap together for you?
I love learning. Is one of the big things. I love learning. I'm very just curious as to how things work. I don't have a very mechanical mind. That died with my great grandfather. My grandfather and my father do not know which side of a hammer to use. It's a running joke in my family. So, I don't really have that mechanical bent, but I really am curious as to how things are put together. And logically, I'm able to do that a lot better with logic than I am with physical objects. You really don't want me taking apart a car. But when I'm sitting there looking at code and taking it apart and figuring out how to put it back together and make it work for me, that's really interesting. And it's not necessarily that I'm especially good with that, because I certainly wouldn't say that with code, because I don't have a lot of patience with a lot of things. That's something that I'm working on. But it's fascinating to me as to how it's put together. And that's really why I got into infrastructure and networking, was because it was how everything works together, and the logic of it all. I love logic puzzles. I've been doing, the penny press and Dell logic puzzles that you see in the drugstores and the grocery store magazine aisles. I've been doing those since I was 10 years old, and my 5th grade teacher introduced me to them. And I just love that way of thinking of how does this all fit together? How do you figure this out with a partial set of information? And that's really interesting to me, is figuring those puzzles out. I love doing that. So anytime I get to do that with a technical puzzle, sometimes it can get really frustrating, but it's really interesting too.
That's really fascinating to me that like you have that technical, I want to take things apart with my brain mindset, but not the physical side of it. Because for me, they're so well tied together. Like I was, as a kid, I got in trouble for taking everything apart. Like my dad would leave something broken on the workbench that he might fix later. And like by that weekend, it was in pieces on my playroom floor.
Well, and I would do the same thing. I would just never be able to, get it back together right. I just, I understand a lot of the mechanisms behind it, but I was never able to really get it all working back together. It was really interesting because physics and chemistry I understood really well from a logical perspective, but put me in a lab and I'm just like, oh, this is really not going to end well. I can follow instructions in a lab, but on my own, it was really interesting to see that, I just didn't have that same physical to logical connection.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I have a similar block. I think it's a hybrid of yours and Paige's, though, because mine is I understand the logic of it when I think about it. And then when I go to do it physically, I have such a I'm not confident.
Yeah.
Like I feel like it's going to fail, but then it doesn't typically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I just experienced that yesterday. So
I always say that I can fix so many things because I'm so good at breaking so many things.
Yeah.
So that's you kind of just have to at some point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm really good with IKEA furniture. That I'm totally good on. I feel
instructions,
great
right?
about that. It has instructions.
They do have
and
phenomenal instructions.
I know, and they're very logical to me. And it's funny 'cause my husband, who is very much mechanical, very, I come home and something has been done to the house, and I'm just like, oh, that's great. I don't even know how you did that, so you can show me. But IKEA instructions completely mystify him because he just does things based on what's in his head. So it's really interesting to see how people think differently.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just always curious about it. My grandfather could plan out logistics for, just tons and tons of people and make, amazing things happen, but give him a hammer. Oh no, that was not a good idea.
Yep.
Couldn't put together a shelf. So
Everybody has their strengths, right?
exactly.
So I also know that you are involved in a bunch of volunteer efforts as well. That's part of your background. Can you tell us a little bit about that and kind of how that marries in with your tech career?
Yeah. So I do a lot of volunteer efforts. Microsoft is great for allowing me to pursue them. One of the efforts that I'm working closely on here is Small Basic. It's a programming language aimed at kids 8 to 11, although anyone can use it. And I love working with that because for me, it's really important, not so much the kids learn how to code in any specific language or anything, but they learn that computational thinking, that they are thinking about algorithms, because even sentence structure is effectively an algorithm. You can tie the two together really neatly. And so I want to encourage kids to have that computational thinking. And then I've mentored with Girls Who Code for 2 summers and participated in DigiGirls during their summer camps for a couple of years, Bring Your Kids to Work Day. I do a lot of that mentoring because I really do want, girls to see that there are women in tech and that we have a variety of jobs. And I want that too for everyone, that it's not just the developers, that you can come in, be technical in a variety of ways, that you don't have to have a CS degree and follow that, very narrow path in order to come into the tech sector, that there's so many options for coming in because especially now that we're in, the cloud service, well, there's a lot of things that have to happen to run a cloud service. I mean, there's infrastructure that has to be built, from the data centers, acquiring the real estate at the basic level to building all the networking that makes it happen. And a lot of that is very technical work. It's just not necessarily straight up dev programming. You may not be writing the code, but you're making all of that happen so that the code can run. And I really want to show people that that's possible.
I totally agree with that. I mean, I even think that, I have a lot of friends who will look for work and they're maybe more on the admin or the QA side of things. And I'm like, look at a tech company. They need people like you too. And they're like, oh, I never would have thought about that. Yeah, Microsoft has HR, Google has HR, go check these companies out. They're doing cool things. And then if you want to move around and move closer to things, there's more opportunity there.
Oh yeah, and that's the thing, is that there are tons of opportunities, and there's tons of ways to be involved in the tech industry, even if you're not straight up, a developer or full on technical. You can be here without, you can be here in HR for, as you said, and then you can move around and you can do neat things. So it's a great place to be.
So with the mentoring that you're doing, what do you find that the biggest hurdle is for young girls specifically these days?
I think a large part of it is it's just visibility into the industry, and it's seeing what their options are. There's not a whole lot of, there's a lot of here's, Girls Who Code, here's all the, learn to code things, but there's not a whole lot of insight into the industry beyond that. And then it's very much aimed also, it only hits a sort of small segment of girls. And, a lot of the stuff is very low level. You see Scratch, you see Touch Develop. It's simplistic in a lot of ways because it's very visual oriented. It's not really coding per se.
Yeah, it's very high level concept-y at best.
It is. It's very high level. It doesn't necessarily get into a lot of the logic of it. And so I think that you miss out on some of the people who are really interested in getting in deep. And so I think that's part of the problem, is that you have people who are interested in getting in deep and you are missing them with some of the, more kid-oriented stuff. That was the nice thing for me, was that when I was in high school, there was nothing like that. So I was immediately dropped into adult level classes effectively. Which was its own challenge. The other is that you still don't have that same level of women in tech that are just out there and visible. You have more of it now, but again, there are not a ton of women around that are out there and that are, pulling in girls. And I think that's just, the hard part of it is that it just takes time. There are definitely more women than when I started in tech, which is great, but it's a slow build.
Yeah. I mean, like anything where we're trying to level out diversity, it's going to take time for sure.
It does. It's not easy to build a diverse environment and to just say, oh yeah, we'll just make it happen. Norway's done a lot of interesting things with, saying women have to be X% on corporate boards. There's a lot of studies that say, diversity builds or diversity improves corporate profits. But you can say that you can have all the studies you want. It doesn't necessarily happen until people really start putting it there. And there's still that lack of sponsorship for women in general. So it's encouraging others to sponsor women. And in turn, they will sponsor the younger generation.
Yeah, totally. I feel like one of the big pieces that I think you kind of were touching on was that we've got a lot of this intro work, but there's so little to kind of give you career path.
Yes.
And I think that's actually true with a lot of the people that I'm meeting that are going through like coding boot camps and stuff too. Like they're getting a much deeper education for the most part, but they're still like, at the end, they're like, "Yay, you graduated, good luck."
Yeah. Mm-hmm. There's not a lot of support for people who are going into the industry, or really for that matter, going into any industry. It's you graduate from something and good luck in the real world. And there's not a lot of hand-holding, which, there doesn't need to be hand-holding per se, but there's not a lot of support for helping people. And it's a skill set just working in the real world. It's completely different than college is. It's, there's a different set of expectations. I got lucky in that I've had a job since I was 14. And so I learned really quickly about how to work and how to meet expectations and things like that. But for people who haven't had that exposure, and the tech sector has its own set of expectations, and there's a lot of questions that you have to ask in the interview to learn, is this the right company for me? It's not just about, are they trying to hire me? But you have to want to work for them. And, there's this whole, it's a 24/7 environment and things like that. And there's a lot of this misperception too around that. I was talking to someone the other day and I said, service engineer implies that it's a 24/7 position. To me, maybe that's not the case, but to me, that's what it implies, is that you're on call. Whereas software engineer implies that you're not on call. And things like that, job titles can make all the difference, because, if someone's like, oh, wait, I'm not sure, even if it doesn't say in the job description, I'm not sure if, that's going to be something that they stay in the interview, then you might walk away from that. So
when you participate in like Girls Who Code or DigiGirls or whatever, are you doing talks, or are you just there as a resource, or what is your participation level?
I have participated as a mentor in Girls Who Code, and I did speed mentoring for DigiGirls, and have also helped out with the coding instruction for DigiGirls. So mentoring in Girls Who Code is one-on-one. It's been absolutely fantastic to work one-on-one with these girls. They were rising seniors. The two girls that I worked with are just absolutely amazing. They're really, really bright, and, just seeing them grow and develop over a summer and really get interested in technology and in seeing what it can do for them. We talked a lot about how it gives you options in your career, how you can, build your own career out of it. You have this gig economy now, if you will. And that's one of the things that we talked about, was how it can give you these options of, okay, so you want to do something else for, part of the year, and you can, work freelance as, a developer for part of the year, as a contractor, and maybe that will fund your passion. And so we had really neat conversations around that. So it was actually a lot of fun. I love that part.
That does sound really fun.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's something about like seeing people's eyes like open up, like, whoa, possibilities.
It really is all about that. It's really neat to see them, open up to new ideas. I just talked to a couple classes of high schoolers while I was visiting my mom in South Carolina, and the sophomores are still sort of formulating, exactly what's going on, but the seniors are really getting into it as I was talking to them about, all the possibilities that open up for them, especially as they're thinking about their future careers, because they're really much more engaged at this point. They're thinking college, they're in the, finishing up applications if they haven't already, and, getting acceptance letters and all that. So they're really in that mode, and watching them as I was talking about, how the interview process went for me, and, a lot of the questions that I've been through. It was really interesting to watch them light up and say, oh, okay, I kind of get that. That's cool. So it was very neat.
That was really cool. Oh, I always like to ask, what are you most excited about that is coming down the pipe for technology?
I am really, really interested in what's coming down in terms of energy production. And the reason being is I'm very curious as to what's outside the solar system. So I would love to see what we can produce in terms of energy that will get us out of the bounds of the solar system. I'm a total sci-fi geek, and Stargate universe. I'm totally like, all right, when can I go on a spaceship across the galaxy? So yeah, that's really what I'm looking forward to is, how do we get, one, how do we save our planet with better, not using fossil fuels and cleaner energy, but two, how do we get off the planet? I'm just fascinated by that.
I like that. I always think about, energy technology. And for me, it's always the green energy technology. But like getting out of the solar system, good call.
Yeah, really.
Yeah,
Seriously.
I'm ready to go.
That's one of the best answers yet.
Let's find that chevron. Let's go.
Yeah, for real.
All right. Well, thanks so much for joining us, Liz. This has been fantastic. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Women's Tech Radio. Remember, you can find the show notes at jupiterbroadcasting.com. You can do the show drop down for Women's Tech Radio and find all of the great episodes that we have done. You can also find the contact form there.
Don't forget to follow us on Twitter at HeyWTR or give us a shout out with a review on iTunes. Thanks so much.